Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar where we'll look at modeling rebar for staircases, slabs, and other concrete elements. My name is Jacobus Oberholster. I'm an AEC and Procon technical consultant with Micrographics. I also support Idea Statica, and you can also check my email address there in the bottom left of the screen if you'd like to get hold of me after the webinar, or if you'd like to schedule a demo or anything like that, please do reach out. Otherwise, you are welcome to leave something in the comment section. We do have a live chat going, and I would highly recommend that you make use of that. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, you're welcome to post them in the live chat, and I will definitely do my best to answer those questions. If, however, we run out of time, I will make sure that I at least find some way of getting hold of you. Otherwise, I just encourage you to send me an email. So, right, without further ado, let's look at our content for today. We'll just quickly discuss our agenda, and then we will jump into our technical content. So, firstly, just the introduction, as always. That is stock standard. We can't do without it. Then just getting into the meat of today's webinar, we'll be looking at modeling rebar for a concrete staircase and landing. We'll look at modeling rebar for a concrete slab as well as slab openings. We'll look at modeling rebar for a concrete column and beam. And then we'll look at modifying rebar tags to suit the South African rebar annotating conventions, which is I think that's quite an important one. I think if anything limits us, it is definitely, if anything limits us from adopting just 3D rebar detailing, it definitely is when it comes to the annotating of rebar in the Revit space. And then lastly, we'll just have a short discussion on scheduling limitations and the required modifications. Now, this is the last of our theoretical, the last of the slides. I always enjoy just quite a lot of a large practical component for any of the webinars I host. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get some information ready, and then what we'll do is we'll jump into our content. And as per usual, you are welcome to ask any questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to get to those questions. So, all right, I'm going to go straight into Revit. And what we've got here is we've got the concrete model. You can see that we've got our rectangular columns, we've got some circular columns, which I'll look at. We've got a widening or a column thickening or column head, or whatever you'd like to call those. We've got our staircase over there, we've got some foundations, we've got slabs, an opening, etc. And so I might not necessarily follow the agenda in order. However, or rather, I won't necessarily follow it in order. I'd like to discuss some of the simpler points first and foremost, and then we'll look at the rebar modeling for our staircase, which is quite complex and it can be somewhat painful at this point in time. All right, let's look at the simplest of things first and foremost, and that's just doing your rebar for your beams. Now, you see I've got some stirrups over here, and what you'll notice from the start is that those stirrups actually extend into the slab automatically. Now, what's very cool is that when you have a beam underneath a concrete slab, the program does pick up that, or rather treats them as one host, basically, which can be useful. Honestly, there are other scenarios where I feel like it would be much more useful for that to be the case. But anyway, that is what it is at this stage. You can see that I've got quite a lot of views open here. And the reason for that is that your rebar detailing in Revit really comes down to the creation of different views using sections, etc. That is really how you get into the nitty-gritty. Don't try to do rebar detailing in 3D. I don't even think the program necessarily allows that. It could have changed recently, or it can change in the future, but you want to create views. So you'll have a lot of different views, And then it's possible that when you get to the end of everything that you might delete those views, or you just might group them differently, whatever it might be. Views really are the secret. All right, before we get to just our first view, what I want to show you is here I have a beam where the ends were, the start point is at a column at this end and the end point is at that end. And on the right hand side, I've actually created a series of separate beams. I created a single view and then I placed these stirrups. And what you'll note is that it does not place those stirrups all the way to the left hand side, even though it is one beam. It actually picks up that there is a separation between columns. So whether or not you generate or create your beams from column to column or across the entire length, the rebar, when you cut a section and you detail a cross section, it will still pick up that that beam is between two columns. All right. So I'm just going to close some of my views. I don't need, yeah, let's save, I guess. I don't necessarily need all of these open. Um, Whatever. If we look at our first floor, you can see that there is a section. We have ground. We don't have any views in ground yet or additional views. I'm going to close these guys. I've got some additional levels and so forth. But on the roof layer, we can see that there's a section, and this section is specifically to detail these beams. All right, so these beams only. You'd actually need to create additional sections to detail these other beams. You can use copy and paste functionality. That does work. However, it would be important that they are the same length. So what I did is I created a section. I adjust its extents so that I can, it doesn't, view depth shouldn't be that deep, and I named it appropriately. So you can see that the section is named concrete beam rebar. Right, so you might have a way of naming them for each beam, which this is beam AB, beam C, BC, CD, etc. But the convention, the naming convention is really important so that you can easily identify which section in the project browser is relevant to which set of beams. All right, so there's my section, concrete beam rebar. And one of the first things I might want to do when I go to detail an element is to set my level of detail either to medium so that you can see well, I guess a two-dimensional shape in this case, or you can set it to fine, which usually can display some additional features of the rebar. Honestly, fine is a bit intense. I don't think we need that kind of detail when we are looking at modeling our rebar, but medium is definitely necessary because when you go to coarse, it is just a line element, which can be useful as well when it gets to detailing and those sort of things. But I think in the context of Revit, I quite enjoy using the medium level of detail. Adjusting the shading or the visual style can be useful as well, although hidden line works really, really well. So I'm just going to delete that stirrup for now. Okay, something you might want to do is when you've placed an element, the hook lengths that Revit comes with as a default are not aligned with Sans 2A2. And so when you select a rebar element, one of the first things you might want to go and do is actually to adjust the hook lengths. All right, let's start off with creating our stirrups. So what I'll do is I'll go to the structure tab. I'll click on rebar. That's fine. That warning comes up a lot. Here you can see the South African shape codes. Now, these are available by default if you've downloaded and installed the South African content pack and then make use of the South African structural analysis template. All right, then they are already there. Otherwise, you actually have to load these in, and each one of these shape codes quite interesting with with these families is each one of these shapecode is, of course, a separate family. So it's quite painful to imagine that you might have to load in quite a few families if you don't have the South African content pack installed. All right, let's look at our stirrup. So there is my shapecode 60. That is the one I'm interested in. And if I can select that, and then I need to pay attention to the contextual tab. So here you have the placement method. So expand to host is really useful. You also have by 2 points. You've got freeform and you've got sketch. And sketch we will definitely use when we start doing our rebar detailing for our staircases. You can load additional shapes. Here you've got your placement plane. So current work plane really does work very well. And you've got your placement orientation. And this is the thing that might trip you up actually. When you want to place a rebar element and you're just seeing the way it displays is not quite right, the placement orientation might be the thing to adjust and to look at. Right, so in this case, parallel to work plane is perfect. And you can see in this case where Revit actually sees the slab and the beam as a single host in a sense. Now, that is useful because in general, this would be a portion of the slab and the beam we'd consider then a T-beam, but we might not want to do that. All right, so in that case, sketch can be really useful. Otherwise, by 2 points can be really useful as well. So with that shape code selected, I'm going to click on sketch. Now, what's really useful about this is that as long as the shape that you're sketching matches the rebar family, so the specific shape code, it will actually retain its shape code versus creating a brand new rebar shape, which is really useful. So I'm going to click on sketch. I have to select my host. And in this case, again, you see those cover lines. So again, Revit identifies this as these as one host. I can then either do a rectangle. And nice thing is I can snap to my cover and I can decide what that height should be. Right, so I can just click there for now. I can then adjust that height. Of course, I know that the depth of this beam is 600. Our cover is 25, so then it should be around, this dimension should be around 550. Unfortunately, now it's going in the wrong direction, but that is how you would then sketch that particular element. Or I'm going to discard this for now. I'm going to go rebar again. We can go for shape code 60. I can go for sketch. I have that element, so I can draw like that. I can then indicate that dimension, so 550, by just typing, and I can close it and I can finish the edit mode. All right. Now, this doesn't look quite right. Of course, we see those straight ends over there. So in this particular case, we have to actually select this stirrup and we have to add hooks at the end. So I'm just going to say it's a hook, the standard 90 degree. And then I'm going to say the same here, hook and the standard 90 degree and click apply. Okay, and that now looks like a decent stirrup. So I'm quite happy with the size, so mild steel and 10 mil. If I click on the drop down, I can of course adjust it to either mild or high yield and select the diameter. I can then click on edit type, and you can see here the type is actually, rather than the shape code, the type is the type of rebar and its diameter. I can then look here under dimensions for hook lengths and click on edit, and you can see there I'm mostly interested for now in the standard hook 90 degrees. And you can see for an R10 the tangent length is 100, or sorry, the hook length is 190, which actually is not in accordance with the SANS 282. If I, for instance, change this to Y10, I'm going to look at the hook lengths. So there is the hook length of 200. So for a Y10, the hook allowance is actually 120 mil. All right, so you would want to go and change all of those. Now, very importantly is you might want to actually set this up in the template itself so that you don't have to go and do that every single time. And quite a couple of the things that we will be looking at in this webinar, I would encourage you to actually set up in a template and then to use that template so that all of these sort of changes, all of these adjustments, you don't have to repeat them. They actually are in the template itself. So right, we've got our stirrup, although this is only one, and when we select it, we can see that there's a rebar set and a layout. And here, if we go from single, we can go to fixed number, maximum spacing, number with spacing, and minimum clear spacing. Now, honestly, maximum spacing works really well. You can see it calculates a quantity automatically based on the spacing, and I'm going to adjust that spacing to 300 millimeters, and you can see that the quantity is now changed to 19. We can also here adjust. We can select host, we can pick a new host, propagate rebar, edit constraints, splice rebar, etc., etc. And those sort of things we'll look at more so when we get to our staircase, which it will actually require. It will require that we actually look at a few of these additional commands. All right, so I'm quite happy with that. Again, normally we would have these extended to the slab. These flanges would be cut off at some point, and this would be considered a T beam. But again, I'm just looking to display or show how some of these commands and things work. All right, so now I want to put in those straight bars, and this is where Revit can feel a bit frustrating. And just something important. So let me rather show this point. So I'm going to change that to perpendicular to cover. We can see that bar there. I'm going to go for a Y20. We can see that bar over there. You can see, although it snaps to, or it picks up that there's cover, it doesn't snap to the stirrup. Now, you can see that the constraint placement is turned on. So for some reason it isn't, but in some cases, especially if you look at things like columns, sometimes these bars do actually snap. It picks up that there's already rebar here and it snaps to that rebar. In this case, that's not happening. And that can be quite frustrating because now we have to somehow place these and correct that placement. Now, in the traditional sense where we look at just 2D rebar modeling, we don't really care too much about accurately modeling the interaction between different bars because it isn't 2D, so we can't fully model how these bars would interact. We genuinely rely on the contractor to understand exactly how these bars would interact and how to bind them on site, or how to fix the rebar on site. Whereas in Revit, because we're working in a 3D space, we can be caught in this trap of wanting to place these bars as accurately as possible, right? Because we are actually now we're modeling the actual placement of these bars, because otherwise it's just going to look stiff when these bars intersect one another. So I'm going to place these bars. I'm going to place 3 of them, and what's really nice though is that the align tools and the dimensioning tools work really, really well. So in this case, it's really helpful to have a grid line running here because it runs through the middle of this beam. I'm going to go to modify, align. I'm going to select the center of that rebar, align it. Oh goodness, sorry, other way around. Select the grid line first and then the bar. And then I can select the top of the stirrup and the bottom of that bar. And you can see I can align those very, very nicely. And those are sort of the tools that you will have to use if you are looking to really accurately model how this rebar would be placed. And I think there's a middle ground in a sense of not fixating too much on it, but at the same time, accurately modeling here can really assist you with determining your lengths and so forth. And also as the designer, you can see perfectly how these bars would interact on site. And then also, if it comes to really complex rebar arrangements, you can actually take snapshots of the 3D model and give those to a contractor who can then actually look at that model and then bind or fix the rebar on site accordingly. All right, so over here we've got some of our dimensions. We can maybe look at 55 and 55. We can do a bit less, 52.5. 52.5. And again, you can see that at some point it is just going to become absolutely useless to work to such a fine point. Like that's good enough. All right, so I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to press enter to shift these dimensions. There we go. So when you hover over it and you hit enter, it shifts which temporary dimensions you can see. I think that was 50 and 50. All right, so I'm quite okay with that. I'm quite happy. I can go into my 3D view and I can see that this is the beam I have detailed. I can actually see that rebar in there. Now, in general, there's a couple of ways you can display the rebar in a 3D view. Is if you select the rebar, if you go into their properties and you go to visibility, view visibility states, you can actually tick here to view unobscured. But what I really like doing is actually setting the transparency of the host elements. So I go to the visibility and graphics overrides. I look for a column, for instance, there's structural columns. I'll click on the transparency and I'll set this transparency to 50. That works quite well. And we can see, okay, there's our rebar. All right, now if we continue to model on this rebar, we'd of course be interested in this interaction here. And that would actually require that we place this rebar, and then we would need a view through these columns where we can actually set the alignment of these different longitudinal bars, so we can actually align them to each other. All right, but that is the basics. What I'm going to look at now is I'm just going to create a view where I can model the rebar for these circular columns just to display a particular point over there. We'll quickly look at our slab and then our staircase. I am a bit worried about time. So let's go into our elevation view, and I'm just going to place a section here. Okay, we actually need a detailed view here. So I have a nice detailed view. I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to change its name to something that just makes sense to me. So there's detail 0. I'll just say circular concrete column rebar. All right, that's good. I can see down in the project browser under detail views, there it is. All right, so we can see the column over there. I'm again going to change this. I might change this to 1:50. And I now want to place the rebar for this column. So I can go rebar. This is a circular column. I'm thinking parallel to work plane for now. I'm looking for this shape code, and you can see that it fills it in nicely. All right, the closer I get to the center. So that's all good. I'm going to change this one maybe to like an R10. Come now. There we go. As all right. So we've got that spiral, and now we need to place our straight bars. All right, so our shape code 20s. So we'll look at this. We'll need to change this to perpendicular. And unfortunately, even if I change the layout, at this stage, a circular host is not supported very well. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this bar, and then I need to actually work with some of the alignment tools. So these grids are very useful. So I've aligned it there, and I might want to adjust this just to something like 253 or 255, etc. All right, so 255 seems to work really well. What I want to do then is select the bar, click on array. It will be radial. The number of will be 8. And then here is my circle, and the angle is 360. And we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down there, 6, 7, 8. And I'm happy with that. All right. And that is how you do rebar in a circular element. So you can see there's our rebar looking great. we'd of course pretty much approach it. We approach it quite similarly with a shape code 62 in the column thickening. I'd put a section actually cutting through the middle on the grid line of that column thickening and working with that, so that I actually have a view from the side. All right, that is really helpful. And then we just use the normal radial array. Okay, let's look at our rebar for a floor. So apologies for that. What we'll go for is we'll go structure. In this case, we'll pick the area tool. So there's area. We'll select this slab, and we have to set everything up on the left-hand side. First, you've got your layout rule, and then you've got your top major direction. So you can tick those. These will all be Y12s. You can see your top minor bar type. There's Y12 again. You have your spacing as well. Let's go for Y12, and then at the bottom, Y12 as well. You can adjust those as you need. I'm then going to select this draw functionality. You can see I can pick up the top of the slab, and I can close that and click finish, and there we have all of our rebar. And the cool thing is that the program picks up a cutout and will actually stop the bars there. If we look at these, we can see that's a schedule mark 2. If we look at these, we should hopefully have a different, there's the rebar number. Let's look if the rebar number is different. Okay, so in this case, the rebar number is different, but you can go and adjust the schedule mark as well, which is something we'll look at a little bit later. But you can see we've got all of that rebar in there quite easily, actually. Okay, the problem here is that it does clutter up your drawing quite a bit. So that's how you'd place this kind of rebar. I'm now going to go to the first floor view, and I want to place the diagonal bars. So this is just to show some of the functionality available. So I'll go for rebar. I'm happy with that for now. I think we need to look at our sketch functionality. I'm going to select the slab, and here you can see I can snap to these different rebar elements. I might just put a bar over there. I'm happy with that. And then what I can do is I can actually use my dimensions. So I can snap from there to the center point. I can change this to 45 degrees, like that. And what I can do then is I can actually use mirror functions, which is brilliant. So I can click mirror, I can click there, and there's that bar. I can select that bar over there. I'm now going to draw the axis. I want to find the middle. There's the middle. And there we go. All right, and I can do the same. If I cut through the slab, I can mirror them top and bottom as well. And that's our diamond bars, right? Those are the sort of things we're interested in. You can then either go and you can delete this dimension. So if we delete it, the bars will still stay there, and then we can use things like copy functions to create doubles. So it's good to actually create the first one, get all of the top and bottoms done, get their spacing correct, and then to actually mirror them along all the sides. That's really useful. So the mirror functions work, your dimensions work. So really, really useful actually that these rebar elements behave like most other structural elements. All right. Yeah, there's different ways of going about it. This is quite annoying for me, so I might end up just hiding this rebar while I'm detailing the opening rebar here, and then I'll look at the alignment. Maybe in this case, I wouldn't even really care. You can see that where they're located. Cool. Okay, so they right at the top. So we need to manage that a bit. We need to mess around with their position. Of course, in this case, so that's why it's so important to go and look as to where these bars are located. And I'm not so sure that our alignment tool will work that well here. So we can maybe have a look. You can see we can only do the center alignment in this case. That's not going to work, of course. It might not even work. I'm honestly just checking this out. It might work, it might not. Okay, it does actually work, which is quite nice. So you can do some of the alignment in the three-dimensional view. And you can see here, if we look at those bars, I don't actually think they've kept their alignment, to be honest with you. Yeah, it messes it up properly. So this is one of those tricky things where all seems well in the one view, but once you go to your 3D view, you might see that there is a little bit of a problem here. So in this case, I would prefer to rather not do the overall rebar first, but to rather do my my diamond bars first and foremost. All right, so really something to take cognizance of, that again, it might seem perfectly fun in the one view, and once you get to the other, it really doesn't work all that well. So it's something we could definitely return to if we have time, but I'd really love to get to our staircase and then the annotating. All right, so we've got our slabs that is relatively easy. Of course, you can select these bars and add hook treatments at the end. You can of course, as you add, well, maybe rather have all of your openings first and then do your rebar. It's really a ton of rebar. It doesn't look great, to be honest. It's realistic, but it is painful to see this in a 3D view. So in some cases, it might be worthwhile hiding it, or it might be worthwhile actually just setting the transparency of the floor to 0 again. All right, so let's go to our first floor. I'm going to create a section over here through this staircase. So um, there is our section. It might need to be a detailed view again, and I am going to create it over here. All right, the depth I will adjust somewhat, and then I'll need to name this again to the staircase rebar. I'll click apply. That's all good, and there we go. All right, so here's our staircase. So this will work a little bit better than some scenarios just because the landing is fortunately seen as a part of the staircase. But you'll notice something interesting when it gets to your tie-ins. So when we have to actually tie in to this rebar at the top, it can get a bit tricky because you've got two hosts. And in this case, because this isn't, it's seen as concrete, it does have a rebar or a cover parameter, which is really useful. In the past, the guys actually converted this to a floor, but where it ties into a different host, especially with some of the different rebar types that we use, it can get a little bit tricky. All right, so we're going to go for it. So I'm going to go for rebar. And in this case, you can see, okay, there's our cover. So it picks it up. It splits it over here, which is very interesting. And if you have rebar, which you will, which ties into the floor above, it gets a bit tricky. All right, so I'm gonna start off here at the bottom. So I'm gonna use a shape code 45. So let's look for a shape code 45. There we go. So this one has got a hook at the end. And so we are going to detail this in a very specific way. So in this case, you can see that it sucks once you try and work with the existing cover. So here a sketch is really important. So I'm going to click. I might actually change the hook length first. I'm going to go to edit type. We are looking for, okay, so that's not going to be visible here immediately. Okay, that's fine. Let me place, let me place that first. That's all good and well. I'm going to use the sketch functionality. So I'm going to click sketch. I'm going to select my host, and I'm going to draw a line from there to there. And I can actually stipulate a length here, let's say of 1,500. And that's good. Okay, so I have my rebar over there. If I select it, you'll see that it fortunately retains its shape code. Okay, and you might be tempted to draw in this first little bit with the shape code 62. But you see, that's a hook, so it's got a fixed length. So you shouldn't draw that one in. Rather, once you've placed these two sides of this bar, you set a hook at the start. So hook and 90-degree. You can see in this case, this one is upside down. So let's see. There we go. All right. So the hook sticks out, which we don't want. So we'll go to edit type. You see there's the hook lengths. I'll click edit type. And here's for Y20. And the hook length for a Y20 as per SANS 282 is 240. So I'll click OK, apply, and there we go. It fits in nicely. All right, so always be cognizant of the fact that Revit, even though you've downloaded the South African content pack, these families with their hook links and everything like that might not be set up in accordance with SANS 282. Okay, so we'll look at adding another bar. So this is nice and easy because the landing is part of the staircase. So I'm going to go for rebar again. I'm going to look for a shape code 37. Okay, and you can see this one actually works very nicely. So I'm quite happy with that one. I'm going to click and place it over there, and we're good. Okay, these guys haven't been spaced out yet, so I am going to set them to maximum spacing of 200. There's 11 of them, and this guy will be interesting. If we go for maximum spacing, I'll go for 200. Okay, and the cool thing here is that it picks up, it very conveniently picks up. If we go to the staircase, let me set the staircase's visibility. Let's go for staircase, or the transparency rather. You can see that it picks up that this one needs to extend across the entire landing, but that this bar needs to only extend for the width of the staircase, which is really, really useful. Depending on how the staircase has been modeled, that might not be the case. But you can see that there's these planes. Once I hover over that rebar, there are these planes, and these planes can actually be aligned to different concrete faces. So those planes can be aligned. If I go to modify and I click align, yeah, I'll save the project, that's fine. You can see I can actually select that face. You can see there it says structural rebar, rebar Y20, shape code 62, bar plane. I can align that to the face of a concrete element, and then I just have to go and check that the cover has been appropriately modeled. All right, so very important. That can be very, very useful and something to definitely remember for the future. So I'm going back to staircase rebar, and what I want to look at is if we have a bar at the top here. So I go structure, I'm going to go rebar, look for a shape code 62. So that is quite a common one for staircases. If we look at 62, you can see that it is quite painful that these two are not seen as co-hosts, I guess, in a sense. So what I have to do in this case is I'll go sketch. Firstly, I'll select the floor as my first host. And then I will select these bars. I'll go up until that point. And I have to find out what the angle is of this staircase. All right, that's quite an important dimension to have. I'll increase this one. I'll maybe make it around 800. And I will click finish edit mode. All right, so for the most part, this is okay. I mean, I can live with this. I might want to amend the alignment a little bit. So I want the top of that bar, although these bars in practice would actually rest on top of this bar. So we might actually look at it that way. Select that guy. I'm going to select that. And this alignment is very important before you start setting that there are multiple of these bars, because you actually have to then go and align them one by one. So I'm then going to select the top here. I'll go for multiple alignment, and it should actually pick up, but I think in this case, let's try again. It could be because this is actually part of that floor reinforcement that has been placed with that area reinforcement. So that could very well be a problem. Yeah, and you can see actually here, it just does not want to do it. Okay, and there's a bit of a hiccup there, right? So in this case, are you going to fuss over this, or is it something that you can actually potentially live with? Okay, it depends really. It depends, but it's one of those things where if we look at this rebar up here, it actually doesn't look too bad. If we look at it in 3D, doesn't look too bad, but it might be worthwhile something to consider whether or not this area reinforcement is really something that you want to go for, or whether you want to detail this rebar separately. It really is up to you, but sections will be the way to go. It's something to be mindful of. Okay, now we have this bar, but we want to extend it to such a way that it picks up the cover on the side. So what do? Well, in this case, we can actually pick a new host. This can cause you some frustration at first because it's something to really get used to, but I'm going to pick a host and I'm going to select the staircase. Right, in this case, you can see I can move this. Unfortunately, it does not snap to that cover, but I can position it in such a way that it's really, really close to that cover. And honestly, to spare yourself a lot of frustration, I would say that that is enough. Okay, but it can be that you might want to play around with that and get it really, really accurate. So you can click on Edit Constraints, and these little bobs here, these little grips, can help you with that. Now, just be mindful that if you play around with this particular grip, you're going to have problems because this is no longer seen as being in this host because, of course, we've picked a new host. So if we click on this, we might have a problem. Let's see if we say 0. Okay, it's okay. It does pick it up. Let's see. Okay, you can see when I set that to 0, let's see, you can see that it no longer aligns itself to this, to this particular face. So and that is a bit frustrating in a sense because we've got those two hosts. All right, so that's just something to be mindful of. Just going to undo those. I want it back to the way it was. Okay, there we go. However, here it will pick up that there's cover. So if I click on this guy here, okay, so in this case it says it has no constraint. That's most likely because of how the cover is running inside of the staircase. Okay, so those constraints can be quite useful. So I'm going to click Finish. I'm going to change its constraint quickly, or change its host. So I'm going to pick a new host. If I go to Edit Constraints now, you can see that it is either to the face or to rebar cover. Okay, but we know we've got an existing bar at the bottom there. But you can see here that it does pick up the cover. I can set that to 0, and it's actually now, let's say, flush with the rebar cover. Okay, so those constraints, they're very useful, especially where you have two hosts and you wish to align your rebar with one host's cover versus the other. So I pick a new host. Okay, let me rather just escape that. Huh. Okay, so this one isn't too happy, but I see that the cover has been retained, so that's okay. And it's most likely because I've just swapped between the host and messed around with their constraints. So you can see that in this case, it can get quite frustrating. Now, here, this is now the host, right? So if I change this from a single layout to a maximum spacing, you can see 181, right? And because the slab is the host, it's now calculating the number of these bars with its spacing in the slab. If I pick a new host, this one is probably going to give me a problem again. So let's just resolve. There we go. All right, so that's been resolved. Let's go for maximum spacing again. Okay, so it actually didn't want to correct that. We can see, yeah, it's still picking up the 182. So I might actually just redetail this guy, and let's do that. So I'm going to go for that one again. I'm going to go for sketch. I'm going to select this guy, and I'm going to snap to that location over there. And then from that point, and again, you need to know what the angle is of your staircase. I think in this case, it's probably it looks 33. I'll finish. All right, and then I am going to align these guys. Let's see if this guy will align to those guys. Okay, and luckily that one aligns quite nicely to the top of those bars, which wouldn't be correct because we want that anchorage. But all right, let's just continue on. I'm going to pick a new host, and there we go. I'm going to move it so that it's over there, and I might extend this. Now this becomes frustrating. So you'll see if I click here and I'll make that 800, you'll see what happens. Now, for the life of me, I cannot tell you why that happens the way it does. It's very frustrating, but there is a different way to work around that. It's to click on Edit Constraints, to click on that guy, and then to modify that value and to see how that affects that A length. All right, that is now the host. So if I go to maximum spacing now, it should pick up the extent of the staircase. And we can see there 111 instead of 181. So you can see why it's important to actually have the correct host selected for the correct workflow. So whatever you're trying to do, you can see there are my bars, and that looks all good. Now, normally we just have an additional set of bars in here, and then we have our bars that run perpendicular to the face of the staircase, and those are easy to align and to position. All right, so let's look at our annotating. Now, annotating is really where these things can be figured out. Where you have difficulty, you can always use the align tools, you can use dimensions, etc. So placing the rebar is not, it can be frustrating, as you saw even with those diamond bars up there, but the annotating is really, really, really important. So I'm going to go to one of my elevations. I think east was the one. Let me see if I can see that rebar in there. Yeah, it does seem like I can see it. So I'm going to change the visibility of my framing, or the transparency rather, and of the column as well. So I'll go for column. Okay, 50. Okay, so first and foremost, when we do our detailing, we usually have only one bar displayed in this kind of view. And you'll notice here as well that these bars go all the way up to the face of the column. Now, that might be something that it might be realistic because these would be cast monolithically. But if you want to move them slightly back, that grip is really, really helpful. So I just clicked it twice just to move it slightly back from that column face. I'll go over here as well and just click it twice. Okay, and that's going to be useful when we start doing our detailing. So I'm going to click on that. I am then going to look for presentation. I'm going to click there and I'm going to select one of these bars. I'm going to exclude all of them. So select none, and then I'm going to just select one of them and click finish. Okay, so there's that one bar. That bar now represents that entire group of bars. And I'm going to go to annotate multi-rebar and the linear one. And if I click there, okay, you can see from the start it's okay. But if you have all of those bars displayed, it's absolutely horrible. But I'll click there, and there we go. Okay, now this sucks, right? This is not how we annotate bars in the South African context. I'm actually just going to turn those sections off as well, just the visibility. Okay, because I don't need those. All right, so we need to modify this. And again, this is one of those things where modifying the template is really, really useful so that these settings are retained in that template, so you don't have to redo this every single time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this, and you can see that there's edit dimension and the select tag, or select dimension and select tag. So this tag is built up of two components, the dimension and the tag, and you actually have to go and change both. So I go and click select dimension, and I'm going to click on edit type. All right, so there's quite a lot of stuff to change here. I'm going to change them from top to bottom. So this is all good. The show leader when text move, I just change this to beyond witness lines. Then the tick mark, I want arrow, I can say arrow filled 30-degree and then arrow filled 30-degree large. The line weight is fine. The tick mark line weight is fine. Dimension line extension and the flipped dimension line extension, I'm going to leave that for now. Witness line control, I'm going to set to fixed to dimension line. These dimensions for now I'll leave blank. The witness line tick mark I'll set to none for now. The center line symbol will be none. Center line pattern is solid. The center line tick mark I'll set to none. The interior tick mark display I'll set to always show, and the interior tick mark symbol I'll set to a filled dot to millimeters. Then right at the bottom, there's one more setting I need to change, and this is the equality witness display. I'll change to tick only, click apply and OK. And there you go. All right, so we'll look at these witness lines shortly, but you can see very quickly there is something that we can work with that looks more and more like what we would imagine. So if I change my scale, 1:50 actually looks quite good. I'll just select the dimension again. I'll click edit type. And this time around, I'll change these values. So flip dimension line extension, I'll make 0. The witness line length, I'll make 2 mil. And the witness line extension, I'll make 2 mil. So those two dimensions I find or value should be the same. I'll click apply and OK. And that looks great. So I'm going to click there again, or rather click on the rebar, and I might move this guy back a little bit more. So 2 more clicks. All right, and there we go. Okay, that looks decent. We're now going to look at the tag. So I'm going to select the entire tag and click on select tag. I'm going to remove the leader line and click apply. And then I'm going to move this close, and then you can actually align these some of these lines. So I'm just going to go align. I'm going to look for something to align to. Let's look. There should be a dot here somewhere. Where's that dot now? I just had it. So there and there. Okay, and that line completely disappears. I can then move this down somewhat. Let's move that down slightly. I'm going to select the tag again, and then I need to now go to edit family. So here I need to set this up. So I'm going to select the label. I'm going to remove all of these. Okay, now we're going to look at this list of parameters. Firstly, I want the quantity. So it will be 16y16. So if we look, then it should be the type name. And then it is the 16y16s. It is then the bar mark. So that should be the schedule mark. I want to adjust these spaces. So these should all be 0. But then the schedule mark should have a prefix of a minus sign or a hyphen and a suffix. Then we have spacing. And I'll set that to 0 as well. And then lastly, I want some comments. So comments are over here. So comments over there, and the space of 1 works well. I'm going to click apply and OK. All right, so I'm going to load this into the project. I'm going to override the existing version as parameters, and we can see, OK, that looks OK. So I'm going to select this rebar. I'm going to change its schedule mark to SO1. We can see that the tag adjusts. And I want to get rid of these millimeters. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we're going to go back into that family. We are going to select the label, click on spacing, and then click on this symbol over here. Untick use project settings. I'm going to change my rounding to 0 decimal places and unit symbol to none. Click OK and OK, and load into project and override existing. And there we go. Right, that looks like a South African convention. Lastly, I'm going to just adjust the comments. I'm going to select, so that can be near face, far face, etc. So those comments sit in the identity data. So I'll set these to stirrups. Click apply, and now this will happen. All right, so one last amendment. So I'm going to click there, select this text, and I'm just going to widen it, lengthen it so that it looks like this. Load into project and override, and there we go. All right, and that is probably one of the main things to do, and you would need to adjust it somewhat for those inclined bars in the staircases as well. But you can see that with these modifications, you can actually get your rebar annotating to match that of the of how we annotate bars actually in the South African context. All right. Now, as a last thing, this will just be a brief discussion, is when we look, we actually have a rebar schedule built in. You can see that there's a schedule over there. Let's look at that schedule. Okay, so I'll talk about this now. But usually if we have schedules, we have a schedule built in. So I'm going to close this guy. Uh, if we go to our Why am I struggling? There we go. It's view. I always forget where it is. We see that there's schedule and quantities. I'm going to go for our structural rebar. There we go. Okay, so now we have the A, B, the total length, etc., etc. But there's a bit of a problem in that, firstly, Revit, again, with how these properties are assigned to families, etc., etc., it does not necessarily assign the same A, B, C, D, or E value to a particular leg of the rebar shape. So that's one thing to consider, and that might require that you go and modify that family. So here we've got the maximum bar length. We've actually got quite a lot of information in here. You can see that I've actually added additional fields called the SANS 282 cut length, and I'll chat about that shortly. There's total bar length. Okay. All right, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to have the schedule. All right, so I haven't actually set the schedule mark here. So of course, this rebar schedule isn't complete. But one thing that I want to mention is that the total bar length that is calculated in Rebar by default is actually a three-dimensional length. So if I click on this bar, if I actually go measure its three-dimensional length, I'll find that that is the bar length. Now that seems all good and well. However, when you compare that to the cut length calculation as per the SANS 282, you'll find that they don't correlate. In some cases, they get very close to each other, but in some cases, they're out by over 100 millimeters, if not even more than that, depending on the shape code and also the particular bar diameter. Now, there's a couple of things that need to be done to rectify this. And one is when you have a bar, first and foremost, you need to ignore the total bar length. Okay, so that is calculated automatically, but that is not a useful value. Secondly, you actually need to add in shared parameters so that you can indicate the bend allowance, hook allowance, and radii as per the SANS 282, because you actually need those parameters depending on the particular shape code. And then lastly, you can see here I have additional identity data, SANS 282 2011. I'm going to match this with Y20. So I want to show you that the hook allowance, radius, and bend allowance values are empty at this stage. All right, so I'm now going to go down to this identity data, change this to Y20, click apply. Right, it doesn't change anything in terms of the space this bar takes up or anything like that. But you'll notice that now the bend allowance, hook allowance, and radius values are populated. Then, for each shape code, you actually need to modify the family so that there's an additional parameter, and I called that the sans 282 cut length, so that there's an additional parameter that calculates the cut length as per sans 282. And then it records that cut length as a part of the rebar schedule instead of the total bar length. That is very, very important because the total bar length is really not useful. It does not correlate very well with the sans 282 cut length. All right, and that is it. If you require further information on that, please feel free to reach out to me by contacting me via email. I'd love to chat and just discuss this sort of thing more. Unfortunately, we are limited to an hour or just over an hour for a webinar. We actually, for this kind of discussion, we need quite a bit more time, but that is where you can reach out to us via mail or even phone in, and you can actually ask them to put you through to me, and we can have a discussion regarding this. We can set up custom training, we can set up templates, whatever you need, we can assist with that. But I really hope that this was helpful. I really hope that it showed you some of the things to really look out for when you're doing Revit rebar modeling. And yeah, some of the things to look out for, some of the pitfalls, and just actually how flexible the rebar elements are. That it isn't a quick click and place kind of effect. It can be under some circumstances, but you would, because we are working with real real world placement, we actually require some additional modifications to the rebar placement and so forth. And then lastly, I hope that what I showed you here with how to modify this tag to get this sort of convention is really, really useful. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope that you enjoyed this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you in future webinars. Again, please reach out, like and subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, hope that you enjoy the content. Please feel free to contact me if you have any suggestions or there's anything particular you'd like me to do a webinar on. I'm always open to ideas.